Oh, hello everybody, and welcome from the sofa, my thoughts of the week. This video is very much probably the most important my thoughts of the week that I've done above all of my rambly videos. Whether it's from, I don't know, emissions and tax on your Mark 1 Focus or whatever the subject that I've spoken about, some of which is linked to what I'm going to say today. And it's probably the most important episode I've spoken about in terms of speaking freely with free speech and a free heart. Now, there's one disclaimer about this video before I start. My videos are not political. I try and make my videos as unpolitical as possible because this is a car channel. You come to watch me to learn about cars and enjoy the passion and the ownership of older cars, which is the absolute niche of my channel, I should say. And it's not political, but unfortunately, the politics side of things does creep in a little bit, and that's what this video is going to be all about. So if you want some depressing things to think about, please don't watch this video, because I'm going to speak solemnly from the heart. I have a lot of notes to read from because there's an awful lot to get through, and I'm going to speak freely. It might be a bit rambly, a bit slightly uncoordinated, but it's the truth, and it's the truth of free speech. And it's unfortunately one thing that our government doesn't like, and that's the beauty of YouTube and parts of social media. You have to depict for yourself whether you think my opinion is correct or whether you think I'm misopinionated and I've been, or I should say, misquoting or misinterpreted the things that go on out there in the first world, especially in the UK, but in many parts of Europe, where unfortunately people's freedoms and control is becoming more and more of a daily occurrence in our lives. And there are, I'm sure, quite a few places that would cancel my voice, the cancel culture. And thankfully, YouTube is not in a position to do that. So I'm going to say what I want to say, and I want you to put your comments below. I hope that this is going to be a good episode. Let's get on with it. To start off with, cars. I love cars, and so do you. If you're watching this, so do you. Whether it's a Focus Mark 1, a Rover 45, a Mark 3 Fiesta, or whatever car that you own and you somehow stumbled upon my channel. The love of cars is all what this channel is about. And the top tip at the end of this video, or the piece of advice that I have for you, I think will make everything that I'm going to say in between the beginning and end of this video quite nice. Cars, it's what gets me up in the morning. It's what motivates me at work. I go to work to earn money to pay for my hobby. Cars have been at the centre of my life since probably 16, 17, when I started to realise, actually, well, I'm studying for, well, I'm doing my driving lessons and studying for my theory. And I thought, once I've got those car keys, I have freedom. And that's the beauty that car ownership gives to everybody who can drive. That freedom, that feel of turn the key, engine starts, we're going on a journey. Whether it's going down to the shops, the doctors, or travelling halfway across the country because you want to see something nice, whether it's a car show or whatever it is. It takes you to some amazing places that you cannot go on bus, train, walking, cycling. And no offence to any of those modes of transport, car ownership cannot and will not be beaten for its mobility and the freedom factor that it has given people gradually more and more and more since the first automotive cars in the 1900s, which only the rich bought. But now everybody owns a car or has the ability to own a car and pass a driving test. All the tools are there. You just need to work hard and you will have the keys to freedom. And that's the beauty of car ownership. That's what gets me to go to work. That's what makes me make these videos. That's why you watch me. And that's the truth. But there has been, unfortunately, a constant war against the motorists. And I say war against the motorists because that quote has been used countless times. Probably that quote can go back, trace its roots back to the 1980s when things started to get AWOL with cars. And I think that's when things started for one particular reason. And there are several subjects that I'm going to cover in this episode why this war against the motorists has not only turned extremely nasty in the last 5 years, 10 years maybe. What things can we do to fight the system? And unfortunately, it is a system. Now, I am not going to brainwash anybody during this episode. You are free people and you have your own thoughts. So whether you believe me or not is one thing, but these are my thoughts. Now, this has come from certain facts. So let's look at some of the subjects. So for a start, the fun. Since I've been driving since 2013, the last 11 years, I have noticed severe changes in the freedom of being able to drive a car. We could call it 15-minute cities. You know, that 15-minute city where you're not allowed to go. Apparently, you're encouraged not to leave an area of a 15-minute radius within, I presume, car distance or walking distance. I can't remember which one. Where all your amenities like shops and going to your doctors, your shops, everything is within 15 minutes. So you should have really no need to leave that area unless it's for social and leisure. What a fantastic fairy world that is. I've heard the quotes about people-friendly clean air and ultra-low emission zones. I live within a low traffic neighbourhood. What a joke. You want to live... Do any of you live in a low traffic neighbourhood? It's a nightmare around here. It's horrible. People just avoid it like the plague now. And I have to circumnavigate what would be a 1-minute journey to my garage is actually turned into 7 minutes because I'm fighting the system. It's nothing to do with pollution. It's about getting money, making people richer, and there's absolutely no benefit to you and me whatsoever. It's the government again, and it stems down from that. And I'm going to bang on about that in a few times this episode. The 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. That has been introduced as well in the last 10 years, where, as I say, it keeps being crept in. The first 20-mile-an-hour cities actually started in 2015, but nobody really talked about it because it was so low scale. And back then, they were probably needed in a few areas just to curb some dangerous driving. So that's fair enough. You know, it is all on the safety side, that respect. But what it's been touted as in the last 3 or 4 years, since that 20-mile-an-hour speed limit has been introduced vastly everywhere, including a lot of Wales today. That's the latest place to get it. It's been touted as a pollution fighting initiative. What pollute? What? I'm not being funny. A 1960s Mini wasn't designed to go at 20 miles an hour. What planet are these people on? But then they're not on the same planet, are they? It's nothing to do with pollution. They know it. You know it. We know that lower gears, higher revs, more pollution. End of the story. It's a joke. So we have that as well. So we have 15-minute cities. We have 20 miles an hour speed limits. ULEZ zones, clean air zones, where somehow when you pay a charge, it disappears. The pollution disappears. That, for me, is the biggest cause. If the government were concerned about pollution, then it would just be, you cannot drive in that zone with that car. You can't pay. You cannot. You are breaking the law. And that, for me, I would respect that. And then you have the agenda of pushing everybody into EVs. Now, to be fair, that is something that gets touted a lot these days. We know the pros and cons of EV ownership. There are more cons than pros at this moment in time. But are we being pushed into EV ownership? No. No. I don't believe that. What we're being pushed into is out of our cars completely and walking on the street. We're not being pushed into any alternative because, unfortunately, for several different reasons, the car has been gradually demonised throughout the last few decades. And what's happening now is we've got to this point where, okay, so the government want me to get rid of my car. Okay, no problem. So what's the alternative? No, nothing. Absolutely nothing. If you ask anybody what the alternative is, they'll say, you could take the bus, public transport. You know, we're trying to improve public transport. And, oh yes, well, you could walk. We've got cycling initiatives as well. And you could get the train. Yeah, train. We're trying to, upskill the trains. And, we're trying to improve the train lines. And we've got more efficiency in that way. Absolute no, sorry, excuse me. None of this stuff is great. The trains, they ain't been improved for decades. They've been left for dead. The trains are absolutely appalling. They do need modernising, but what they need is a complete ripping up and putting down, using train tracks for the 1920s or even older than that. And we're still using them 100 years later because the government have put no money into them. Public transport's awful. I wouldn't get on a bus. I'd actually rather walk, to be honest with you. And cycling, you're joking. Everybody who I know who cycles, either to and from my workplace or for leisure, they've been hit. They've been hit and they've been in hospital with head injuries and back injuries and knee injuries. Why? Well, possibly because people can't drive. That is a problem. And if it was for the fact people could drive better, then yeah, I can understand that. But that's why I wouldn't cycle, because unfortunately there are too many idiots on the roads who can't drive, who forgot how to drive. But that's another story for another day. So there isn't an alternative apart from walking. So they want you and me, hard-working people, working class people, out our cars and back on the roads. And that's precisely where they want us. The people that can afford EVs, well, they're not really working. I wouldn't class them as working class. I'd say the upper middle working class. People with exceptionally good jobs who can afford it on lease. People who are well off. Now, I'm not dividing a class war here, right? I would love it if I could own a Tesla. Maybe I would, to see what they're like. I'd probably be very disappointed. But in the cases of everything, most working class people cannot afford an EV. And when EVs are at least 50,000, 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 pounds, I'm thinking, there's no cars that are enticing. Electric cars are fine in principle, but where's the affordable ones? The most affordable ones are 25, 30,000 pounds. That's not affordable. That's not affordable for most people. And that's why people push the lease. And then they get into debt over it. There's no option. I mean, it's like when you walk into a dealership now, it's almost like the car manufacturers themselves, the car designers, have actually completely lost any form of passion for designing cars. I think even they are starting to feel the effects of all this political legislation and this zero emission obsession, which is just ridiculous. Right, hold on. We can't talk about zero emissions like that, because if the BBC say that zero emissions is like it's the flavour of the month, we must believe in it. We must believe in it because it's the BBC, and people love being brainwashed by the media, and the BBC is the worst one. The best thing though about EV ownership, coming back onto that, is the fraud of it is that EV ownership has been proven to push pollution from the streets caused by ICE vehicles to the power station. That's all that's happened. The actual pollution has been moved from the street to the power station. So really, honestly, if you could afford an EV and you are not one of these people that have to walk in the future, are there any cars that are enticing? No, there's absolutely no enticing cars whatsoever. But then again, it seems to be SUVs. I mean, you've only got a choice of SUVs these days. SUVs, I mean, they can't be that bad, Andrew. I mean, people keep buying them. Yeah. The reason people keep buying them is because for some reason they've been brainwashed into believing that an SUV is somewhat a more practical car than the old-fashioned cars that actually, when I say old-fashioned, they used to actually be highly practical. Like your Volvo estates, for a start, that unfortunately they're going to die out now. The old Volvo estate, which made Volvo the company it is, well, they're ditching that for SUVs completely, like every other silly company. I mean, honestly, it's pathetic. They're not more practical. They're not much more usable. And then the second thing is, oh, they're safer. No, just because you've got 10 foot of metal in the way. No, it's absolutely not safer. Well, it can't be much more worse than the driver who's actually got their hand on the mobile. I actually find that quite ironic. People who drive SUVs literally say, I need a safe car, while driving using their mobile phone at the same time. That's the worst problem, and that is your problem. It's a cultural endemic issue with not the car's not the problem, it's the user that's the problem. Unfortunately, the consequence of that is we've only got SUVs to choose from, and that means no new cars for most petrol heads beyond about 2020. And then we have some factors like insurance. Inflated car insurance. We all know that in the last 12 months, for some reason, car insurance companies have decided that everybody's insurance policy, whether you're a 20-year-old driver with no claims bonus or a 70-year-old driver with God knows how many years no claims bonus and nothing to your name, who drives probably a very small car, maybe a classic car, whatever, they've decided everybody is going up by a few £100s. They've just decided a blanket up. Why? Well, they claim that it's because modern cars are much more expensive to repair, crash damage, and therefore the price of insurance has to go up. No, I don't buy that. I think it's just a collaboration from insurance companies. I potentially think that there are, and this is just my guesswork, but I do think there are people in government who are very close to the hierarchy of the insurance bureau, the insurance network, i.e. the actual the regulatory body in charge of insurance companies in this country. And I do believe there is another factor, and that is we're going to try and kick people out their cars by not only some of the factors I've just mentioned, but putting the insurance up. And it's a simple fact is, there are rumours going around that insurance companies will no longer insure petrol diesel cars in about, well, some time in the future. I don't think that will be quite true. I don't think it will be so brutal, but everything is rather subtle. Everything that's happening to motorists could be dismissed as, no, it's something else. So, for instance, the insurance going up is being dismissed by insurance companies and the hierarchy as, well, cars are more expensive to repair, so therefore everybody's insurance policies, I'm afraid, are going up because we have to pay for people's damage repairs. That's not the truth. The truth is that there are people in government wanting to push people out of their cars, the poorest people of society, by raising car insurance. And therefore the insurance companies are like, and we're like, and the government are like, and that's the truth. The other thing is, and also, well, we've got the insurance part of things, which is a real concern. I've had to fight tooth and nail to insure the Rover 45 at just fractionally above what it was last year. I was lucky with that car. I might not be so lucky with the Focus. I've got that to come to in a few months, so goodness me, I don't know what's going to happen with that. But I will fight every tooth and nail. But anyway, the next one, petrol availability. So we've got all these factors from above. We've got the control element of ULEZ, clean air zones, 15-minute cities. Now we've got the insurance going up through the roof. So economically, financially, it's becoming more difficult. And now the petrol availability, the very thing that makes our cars drive down the road and back. Petrol diesel availability. Now, E5 petrol, unfortunately, has a guarantee of only 2.5 years left. I believe in 2.5 years' time, the guarantee of E5 that the government secured from the Petrol Retail Association is finishing. It will be reviewed. There's no guarantee it will continue beyond that date. I'm pretty sure it will depend on one major factor, what the take-up of E5 is. I tell you what, with the amount of classic cars in the country and older cars that are using that fuel, I think we should be okay. But eventually, I think E5, super unleaded, will reduce. And I believe that in the future, it may only be possible to get E10 fuel. It may be a case that E5 will be licensed to certain special petrol stations, and that will cause a lot of heartache for classic car owners who are nowhere near where those license places are. And that is what's going to happen, I believe. It is coming, but the war on petrol it just increased. Now, there was there's a lot of tax on petrol and fuel at the moment. The government make a lot of money through the taxes. They're not going to want it to end prematurely yet, but it will be phased out slowly. And I do believe that that will eventually come to a head. I don't believe that the stories that certain people within the classic car media, like Mike Brewer, who made a comment very much the once that petrol will always be available during my lifetime. And it depends what sort of interpretation you have on that quote. And I believe for people like Mike Brewer who have got more than a few pennies worth, I believe that he'll be completely insulated from that cost. It will always be the poor, working class people that will suffer because of the petrol rises. And the lack of availability of petrol, I think, will be a problem in 10, 15 years' time. I really do believe that. I also believe that petrol will always be around in 30, 40 years' time, just as Mike Brewer probably has quoted, but it will only be available for, unfortunately, the very rich. And that is a sad truth. The only people that will be able to drive a combustion car are the very rich. Petrol could be as much as £20 a litre. It could be something as stupid as that. I don't know what price it could be, but it's going to be extremely difficult in about, I'd say, 15 years. Give it 15 years, maybe 20 years, and then things will just start turning really terminal for ICE cars. What's even more interesting is the actual war against the actual mechanics of our cars. I mean, people talk about, E10, ethanol eating away at cars. Literally, it's burning cars up through destruction of rubber fuel hoses on classic cars and brass components in carburetors. This has been proven to be a problem. That is why owners try and put E5 in, to minimise the damage, even though E5 fuel has been known to cause damage over long periods of time. And that has killed probably a lot of classics off, in truth, because the ethanol eating away at fuel hoses, fires, etc. We've seen classic car fires. It has happened before. It's as simple as that. But this has happened before, and it happened in the 1980s, the late 1980s. Remember when cars ran on leaded petrol and then switched to unleaded petrol at the end of the 1980s, and car manufacturers had to make their cars unleaded friendly? So basically cylinder heads with hardened valve seats, an unleaded conversion. Yeah, remember that was a thing? And if you had a car that was supposed to run on leaded fuel, you had to harden the valve seats, which was a costly conversion to the cylinder head, and not many owners did it. And to the point where if they didn't do it, your valve seats would go, burnt exhaust valves, scrap. People just scrap the cars. How many cars went to scrap in the 90s because of this problem? How many classics died in the 90s and 2000s because nobody bothered to harden the valve seat? Why did they need to? There was no need to get rid of leaded petrol. Well, was there? Well, the idea was that leaded petrol was a bit poisonous, so they wanted to take the lead out of petrol and replace it with another chemical, which is unleaded fuel. And I can't remember the name of the chemical, but that chemical, ironically, that they replaced the lead with in unleaded fuel is more poisonous than the lead in the leaded petrol. It's more poisonous to the environment. So it was absolute fraud. This leaded to unleaded crap was fraud. And they did it. And they're doing it again. The lessons have not been learned, but are they being learned, or are they deliberately doing this? Make your mind up, because I know where my mind is on that. So you've got the petrol thing, and then you've got the perception. And that is unfortunately what was triggered by Dieselgate. Oh God, yeah, Dieselgate. Okay, so we all know about Dieselgate, okay? We all know the damage it has done to diesels, with the fact that there's nothing wrong with diesels. Yeah, we do know that they're a bit more pollutant, but they've got less CO2. They're doing a bit less damage to the environment. It's just us that it affects. But diesels in good condition, they were no harm. But Dieselgate, unfortunately, I think was completely over-exaggerated and was definitely used by governments as a weapon. I do believe this zero-emission crap was started with Dieselgate. Now, I'm going to come on to the zero emission thing in a bit later, but I think the saddest truth about Dieselgate wasn't actually Dieselgate, because VW, that brand that I don't like them, and a lot of you guys don't like that brand, VWs, they've produced some brilliant cars in the past. I love certain Mark II, Mark III Polos. They're good. Mark II Polos, not so much. Mark III Polos are very underrated. Golf Mark 1, maybe the Mark II, but after that, not really great as such. They have produced some really good cars. VW Passats, the Scirocco, they've produced some really good cars in the past, and I'm not denying that. But VW as a company in the last 20, 25 years, I've not really enjoyed. Their products are overrated for what I think they are. Most of you will probably agree with that who watch me, because this is not a VW channel. I don't understand VW's involvement. It's just a completely overrated brand in itself. But anyway, another video for another day. But VWs, whatever you think about VW, I want you to actually triple it by 20% dislike. Because some of you may not be aware about the fact that VW, in actually testing some of their diesel cars, used to put monkeys. The rumour was they put monkeys into a room, 10 monkeys into a confined room, put a TV on to keep the monkeys occupied, and filled the room with poisonous exhaust gases to experiment on the condition of the gases and how it affected the monkeys. Obviously, some of the monkeys died. They were sophisticated. Sorry, did I just say that outright? A car company with a brand name the size of VW, with all the quality and the assurance that comes with it, used monkeys, knowing they would die, in an experiment testing exhaust gases. What was scandalous wasn't Dieselgate, it was the monkeys. Never ever buy VW, because that's the sort of company you're buying off. If anybody is, honestly, I don't believe anybody who watches this channel thinks anything of VWs, but if you do, that is what VW is as a company. They are absolutely sick. To be fair, forget Dieselgate. Shouldn't that have been enough to kill VW as a brand? But it hasn't. That company now survives, and people are still buying VWs. People are so brainwashed in their own lives that they literally are blind to what actually goes on out there, instead of believing what the BBC tell them. So you have that as well, which for me has created the nasty feeling around zero emissions, about pollution. That pollution is somehow, there's actually better pollution. No pollution is good, but pollution in terms of usage, older cars are brilliant at that. Absolutely brilliant. And what Dieselgate did was kill a lot of good diesels off that were used and in good condition, and it is just a sham. And it started out with the brainwashing element of Dieselgate. So the car for me has been demonised for a lot of reasons there. There's a lot of factors that are converging on you and me with owning older cars, and it is getting harder to own older cars. Politicians have caused the issue where, unfortunately, cars are now economically and financially ridiculously hard to keep, and sustainably hard to keep, and now perceptionally demonised and disgusting to most of the general public, who haven't got a clue, who are sleepwalking into oblivion. The same sort of people that are in America who are voting for Donald Trump. And this zero emissions, it's brainwashing. It's utter brainwashing. The whole population of Europe has been brainwashed into thinking that this zero emissions thing that we are trying to achieve is an actual achievable goal. And that by doing that, anything which produces any sort of emission on the road is banned. Despite what I said about the pollution moving from the streets to the gas stations, to the power stations that are used fossil fuels. It's as simple as that. Fossil fuels create electricity, and then people think that the EV is clean. It's not clean. In fact, I'm now beginning to see EVs as a symbol of even worse pollution for nice vehicles. That would be an interesting thing, because I'm sure the BBC would never run with that. EV cars are more polluting than ICE vehicles. But we would never hear of that, because unfortunately it doesn't fit in with the BBC agenda to support the government's idea of zero emissions. It's not the flavour of the month. We don't want to hear about it because it's not good with the righties. It's certainly not good with the lefties either in certain cases. So we can't talk about that. We have to shut the conversation down and only talk about that's bad, cars are bad, this is bad. You guys, general public, you need to get rid of your petrol diesel cars because it's bad. Zero emissions. We move on because we're better than that. There is a quote. How should I put it? It's easier to fool people than to convince people that they have been fooled. Yeah. Well, what do we do about it, guys? Well, that's my little rant over, and I've covered a variety of different subjects now. What do we do about it? What do you and me do about it? What can we do? The good advice that I can actually give you is something that you're doing anyway. You love your cars. I love my car. I love all of my cars. You love cars, I love cars. And for me, love conquers all, and it gets over every single obstacle. If there is a barrier, there is a way around. If there is a door, the door can be opened. And I know that these are quite cliche quotes, but it's true. We love our cars and we will do anything to enjoy them, and we will not be told what to do. I mean, that for me it is all about love for your cars. It is simply all about love and forgetting what people think, because people will always think differently to you. So don't forget what people think. Forget the fact that your neighbours think you're an idiot for owning old cars, because you should pity them, because they are part of the brainwashed population that haven't got a sodding clue about the actual realities of the newer car that they've just bought, that they think is cleaner out the tailpipe, but it's not cleaner, is it really? It's a sad truth, because their SUV weighs a few times more than the small cars, small economical cars of the past. That's the truth. So you carry on doing what you do. You show the love to your cars. You take your car on journeys. Enjoy the drive. Enjoy the way it sounds. Enjoy the cleaning and the polishing and listening to the engine. Going to car shows. Meeting new friends. That's what it's about. That's what cars are always about. And nobody can take that sense of freedom away from you. The only thing we have to combat is all the issues of above. Well, insurance, just be careful with money. Just make sure that you've got enough money that you can insure your cars. Car tax, the same. How do we deal with ULEZ zones and clean air zones? Well, simple, don't go near them. If you do want to go in them, be prepared to pay. Maybe it's your budget, just budget some money. A big sticky two fingers up. Drive right through the centre of London. You're going to pay that toll? You're going to pay the ultra low emissions charge and the congestion charge? Go straight through London in your classic car. Drive straight through. Stick your fingers up at Parliament, because that's exactly what most people tend to think. But that's my impression. And that's my advice. Keep loving your cars. Enjoy your cars, because they won't be around forever. Because the biggest problem, unfortunately, in the world of cars that we have today is the generational shift. The generational shift of what was, when I started driving in 2013, 50s, 60s and 70s classics were hot. They were booming. They were absolutely booming in terms of popularity, desirability, car values, car parts availability, everything. It was definitely cars to have. In 2014, I bought a lovely 1973 Rover P6. I loved that car to a T. And I think, as much as I regret selling it in some respects, I think I sold it at the right time, because it was probably the right time to release a classic of that age, because I felt the car had become so expensive to just run for a few hundred miles a year. And that for me is where the fun started to go out of it, where I couldn't run it anymore. And that's unfortunately a lot of classic cars. And that generational shift from 50s, 60s, 70s cars has already shifted 11 years later to your 80s and 90s classics, and the early noughties modern classics are creeping in. Ford Focus Mark 1s, for example. That is the generational shift that has taken place. I made a comment ages ago at a car show, which is rather crude, but I'm going to say it. People that want a Mini, people that want a 1960s Mini, they either own one currently or they're dead. It's pretty true, isn't it? And that describes in a nutshell the shift. The shift has already happened, and sadly there are not enough young people that are willing to put money into cars that are very expensive, increasingly difficult to run, increasingly difficult to get the parts, and increasingly difficult to find, well, the fuel for a start, which will be a problem in the future, and all the rest of the associated costs with owning a classic that age of a car that is probably double their age and is not of their time. So therefore, how can you get nostalgic about such a car? There are very few young people that do that, and I take my hat off to any young person who wants to do that, because it is not for the faint-hearted. For those of you who are not aware, who are thinking of making a jump, don't be afraid, because the next thing I will say is, if you want a classic car now, or you thinking of saving up, I would think about looking at the money you've got and buying one now, very soon. Because classic cars, for me, the way the classic car movement is going, I believe that it's going to be almost impossible to run a classic car, I'd say pre-1980, in 20 years time, 15, 20 years time. I think that will be your time. So if you want to enjoy a 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe early 80s classic, you need to do it in the next 10 to 15 years, okay? You need to have that mindset, because, and this is the next point, don't buy a classic car to just buy it to sell. Classic car dealers, classic car auctioneers, the way they make money, they have to have really good cars in to make money. But I am very convinced that the values of cars pre-1980 are going to plummet by the end of the decade, and those cars won't be worth much at all. And I think you'll find this is where classic car dealers and auction houses will have to move on to the younger stuff, but some of them will die. Some of them will just die, because there's not as much interest generically in 80s, 90s stuff as I think there was in 50s, 60s, 70s stuff 10 years ago. So I don't know whether there'll be a shift towards the younger cars, and I don't think it will be obtainable or desirable enough. So I think we'll be in a situation where a lot of cars are not going to be worth what they're worth now. That Mark III Fiesta outside could be worth quite a few thousands and thousands of pounds in 5-6 years time, because it's a Ford, it has an oval badge on it, and it will be in very, very good condition if I've got anything to do with it. But at the same time, I can't hold on to it for too long, because after 2030, who knows what it's worth? Could be worth absolutely practically nothing. It might be worth something, but you never know. But for me, classic cars and making money on classic cars like wheeler dealers and all the rest, you can't make money on them like you used to. People aren't buying them like they used to. People haven't got as much disposable income now. And most of the 60s, 70s classics that I see are either completely fully restored and are never driven outside the garage for that reason, or are in completely dilapidated condition. And you must have some form of straitjacket, or you probably require one if you are even thinking of buying one. I think the biggest problem with modern classics as well, which can be summarised by one particular thing. There was a magazine. Do you remember a magazine called Modern Classic Magazine? It disappeared in 2020. It went bust. The magazine went bust. Why? People weren't buying them. That magazine appealed to younger people into modern classics. My age. Young people don't buy magazines. They couldn't get enough people buying them. I don't think they had enough sponsors willing to actually sponsor the magazines. The adverts of sponsors is what makes magazines viable, not necessarily people buying them. But it turns out they had neither. And that was a real shocking thing that happened during COVID. That magazine failed. And I think it was a symptom, unfortunately, of the classic car, modern classic world, unfortunately shrinking and collapsing in on itself. I'm afraid the world of classic cars is a bubble, and it's been a fantastic bubble the last 20-25 years, and there are people convinced that it's going to last much longer. But you have to look at the writing on the wall, and the writing on the wall is all of this. everything I've said. It's out there in plain black and white. And there are people out there, car enthusiasts included, that are literally turning a blind eye to this because they don't want to hear the truth. And this episode is about the truth. So I hope for those of you who managed to sit this longer episode and actually take a lot of what I've said in, because these are all issues that you have been aware about. It's just some of you have put it to the back of your minds. Some people out there have absolutely not only put it to the back of their mind, they've actually pretended to forget about it completely, because the truth is so hard to absorb that it's really upsetting. And the problem is, people like to believe in the best of, we like to believe in the best of humanity. We like to believe that the government is on our side and that they have our best interests at heart. And when anybody says anything remotely negative about the government and expose how bad they are managing things, basically, in a nutshell, making their friends richer, making your life as a working class poorer and harder and more miserable, and having less freedom, and they have more control over you than anything, that truth, people don't want to hear it because it's too upsetting. Well, congratulations to those people who've managed to make it to the end of this episode, because that's the truth. And this is what we have to combat against. And it really does make me feel quite depressed looking at all this. But it makes absolutely no difference. None of that is going to stop me doing what I do with any of my cars. It's as simple as that. It's all about fun, like I said. And as long as you can meet some friends, get out in your cars, enjoy the sounds, enjoy the moment. Life is for enjoying the moments. So maybe this isn't an episode about cars. Maybe it's an episode about life. You have to live every day as if it's your last, because you don't know what's round the corner. And classic cars, modern classics, if you want a modern classic of a certain ilk, if you want a classic, what are you waiting for? Buy it. Because it might be your only chance of ticking that box and experiencing the true love of a classic car. And the ups and downs, but mostly love. And I think that is where I end this episode. Take care, guys. Enjoy your cars. And fight. Fight. Because it's the only way forward. Take care.